in case you don't know who he is, or maybe somebody watching at home, he is the co-author of one of the greatest books ever written, certainly the best if you suffer with any kind of addiction, called The Pleasure Trap. He is the psychologist at both the True North Health Center and the McDougall Live-In Program, both in Santa Rosa, California. He has a wonderful website, esteemdynamics.org, and he does a podcast. There's like over 130 episodes. Truthfully, all you have to do is listen to those 130 hours, and you'll be fine. And they're available on Blog Talk Radio. It's called Beat Your Genes. And you can even, people say, oh, I can't afford a session. Like, okay, it's $75. You can afford it, all right? If you're here, you can afford a session. But if you can't, call the show. It's free. You can call him up on Wednesday night. So ladies and gentlemen, here for doing a Q&A. He's not going to do a straight-up lecture. That's tomorrow. So we're going to actually come into the audience for your questions. Dr. Doug Lisle. Woohoo! Yay! Wow, doesn't he look good, ladies? Dr. Lisle, I don't want to embarrass you, but I was at a gift shop here, and I saw this little bell, and I thought it would be perfect for you. It was a red bell, and it said ring for sex, and all you had to do was ring the bell. So your birthday's coming up. I thought it'd be the perfect gift.
Oh, man. Just only one of those. I only made one. All right. Well, we're just going to do Q&A, and we'll just start wherever. How do we do this, AJ? We just decided to do this year for fun.
All right. So the people that came the farthest, is there anybody that came from Canada that has a question from Dr. Lisle?
Hi.
Okay. Are you really from Canada? I need to see your passport. Where are you? Okay. Now make it a good one, because I'm telling you, I don't want to put any pressure, but he hates stupid questions. He won't act like he does, but afterwards, he's just going to talk to me the rest of the day about, like, why did you let that lady ask the question? So tell your name, where you're from.
My name is Brenda Joyce Estelle, and I am from Vancouver Island, Canada.
All right, very
wow,
good.
That's terrific. So what is your question for Dr. Lisle?
My question is how to beat alcohol.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Not a stupid question.
Okay. How to beat alcohol. This is a broader question of how to beat addiction, and the answer to that question is going to be multifaceted. So there's going to be several different things that we're going to talk about. So we'll start by understanding that that we're going to have to make major changes. Usually the most effective way to affect change in your life is to change your environmental circumstances. So there's things about when a person drinks, what they drink, how they get to whatever the substance is. Those chains of behavior have to be altered. And so, for example, obviously if there's any alcohol in the house, it's got to be gone. If there's people that you drink with, then we have to tell them that we're going to kind of say goodbye to them for a while, and we're going to have to say, it's not personal, you love them, but this is going to have to change. And so you're going to block their phone. You're going to block them from calling you. They can email you, okay, but no phone calls. So this is that's if they're drinking buddies. It's not if they're your best friend that you once in a while have a glass of wine with. But if you have people that you actually, it's not uncommon for people to drink in groups, and so we have to break that up. The social processes that the person is going through have to change if that's a big component. A few things that you want to add is if you're not already doing this, you want to add exercise. You may or may not get any kind of support like AA or something like that. That doesn't fit everybody. It's not it fits some people well, but it by no means any extra special help. You may want to get the services of some kind of counselor that you talk to on a regular basis, like once a week or so, just to process what you're going through. You want somebody that has a lot of people that deal in addictions, that do addiction counseling, are not. Let me see how to say this. There's a lot of folks in that industry that are recovering themselves, and there's a belief, there's a folklore that's what's required to be effective at this. This is a mistake. What you really want to do is to go to your health insurance and find a licensed professional that is experienced in all kinds of things, because it isn't just alcohol we're dealing with, it's how the whole life is disrupted around us. Let's see, there's some other things. And I would also say, I think a nifty idea is the following. AA has had the notion of a feeling of achievement that comes with going a certain length of time. A month chip, that sort of thing. The thing is that I think that's good, and I think it's that can be a useful incentive day to day, that you're keeping track of your success and you're counting days and so forth. But I actually think that there's a twist that we can give to it that's important. Whenever I'm trying to help people do anything hard, what we want to do is we want to substitute the path for what I'm going to call esteem with a path that we're going to call self-esteem. So the AA model and other models, or talking to the counselor, et cetera, all these things have a perfectly fine aspect that we're trying to, part of the incentive is that we're trying to not be embarrassed, and so we feel a little push and a little expectation that we're supposed to hold this together. That's not a bad thing, but it's actually not where I want the focus of anybody's attention. There's a critical and quiet other mechanism of esteem that is hosted inside of human nature. It's what I call self-esteem. It's not been well understood, but I want to describe to you the difference between esteem and self-esteem. Esteem is the feeling that you get when other people are signaling to you that they find you valuable and worthy. So it's when they applaud you, it's when they give you an award, it's when they say, I love you. All those things are important. Those are the things that human beings naturally seek, because as social creatures, our survival and reproductive success depends upon what other people think of us. Literally, what other people think of us is the most important thing in our environment. It's more important than whether it's hot or cold. It's more important than whether there's enough food out there. In other words, your standing with respect to other people is incredibly important in determining your well-being. That's how we're built. It's not as much true today as you take away. You can have Allstate, for example, and you can have food in your refrigerator, and you can be on a pension, so you don't have to talk to anybody and you're still safe. But that's not your psychological nature. Your psychological nature is to be extremely interdependent with other people, and therefore we are acutely sensitive to the feedback that other people give us, whether or not they think that we are worthy, that we're good, that they want us to still be in their coalition, etc. So when we are doing things, we're usually aiming all of our desires at self-improvement of any kind are aiming at esteem. They're aiming at what other people are going to think when we've accomplished this or that. We're trying to reduce embarrassment from having a problem, or we're trying to have some achievement that people are going to think is cool. That's what we're up to, and there's no shame in this. This is just human nature. However, a critical component of achievement is not even though we're aiming consciously at the esteem, there's another process that's happening inside very quietly. That's what I'm going to call self-esteem. We have inside of us, instead of the audience of the real people on the outside that are going to be tracking and watching our achievement, there's people on the inside. There's imaginary people, what I call the imaginary audience, or the internal audience. They're essentially they're a virtual reality program that resides inside of humans, where we conjure up images effectively of what other people would think of us if they saw us doing what we're doing when nobody else is around. And this is the audience that we're really playing to when it comes to dealing with something like alcohol. It's your internal audience that's the problem. It's not really the external audience. So it's the internal audience that we're trying to impress. And we have to get clear that the internal audience knows everything. In other words, they're watching everything. They can see everything that you do. And so the internal audience is relentless and almost always very just when it comes to meting out esteem. So just as other people signal esteem to us and will feel good when they do so and feel bad when they signal rejection, the internal audience will also signal positives to you if you earn it, and it will send you negative signals if you don't. Now, you can see that these two things are very different, so that what's popular is not always right, and what's right is not always popular. So a person that does the right thing, but it turns out they get nothing but grief for it from the external audience, they can be hurt and feel rejected and disappointed that that's the response from everybody else, but their self-esteem tells them they did the right thing. Okay? Their self-esteem is unshaken. So they feel like, you know what? It's a bummer that I'm being kicked out of this group, that they stripped me of my membership here in this outfit, and that nobody likes how it is that I did things or what it is that I said, but I did the right thing. Okay, that's self-esteem. On the other side, you could be Milli Vanilli, okay, which is no joke. So the world thinks you're great, but you're a fraud. So that was, those two young men, they didn't know what they were getting into. They were just two cool guys that could really dance, but they couldn't sing. And so some producer said, hey, no problem, guys. You can't sing. Not a problem. We're going to have you dance. We're going to have other people sing. We're going to put it together. It's the MTV generation, and everything's going to be cool. How did they know they'd win the Grammy for the best new artist in the world? They didn't see this coming. How did they know they'd sell millions of albums? And so when it comes out, you can imagine what a bizarre experience this was for these two young men, with esteem pouring in, partially earned, because it's not like they weren't cool and couldn't dance. Okay? So partially earned, but not wholly earned. And then at the root of it, what do we have? A fraud. And the internal audience knew it was a fraud. And ultimately, one of those young men committed suicide. Okay? That's what happens when that sort of a mess gets put into place. So, back to alcohol. What I'm after, and actually we'll talk about this tomorrow when we talk about weight loss, because it's the same kind of a process. We're trying to do something that's difficult to do, that what we are aiming, for example, with weight is we're absolutely aiming for esteem. We want to look better. We want to get better feedback from other people. This is absolutely and legitimately what people are seeking. But it's not what they should be making the primary focus. The primary focus needs to be self-esteem. It needs to be having the internal audience watch you when no one else is looking. And it's earning the esteem signal from the internal audience, where the internal audience looks at what you did that day and says, well done. That's how we want it to work. So we need some way to enhance the signal that the internal audience experiences when you do a good job of being abstinent, because it's not a very fancy thing to do. Okay, so being abstinent, it's like, well, I didn't drink. Well, would we give you a gold star for that? It's a little tricky to do that. So you can see why AA has done what they've done, and it's a good thing, but I think that we can go further. I think that a person that goes a length of time, say a month, they grit their teeth, They go through the extinction burst that you guys have heard me talk about. You have to fight your way through, in any addictive process, you have to fight your way through a classically conditioned defense that is going to try to pull you back into the trap. If you get through that, and you go a month, and at the end of that month, what I think, maybe it should be a week, but I think a month is a good idea. I think you should do something altruistic at the end of that month. I have somebody that is spending a little bit of money to save an animal with one of these agencies every month. And then what this person does is that they have a picture and the certificate of that animal that they saved, and they put it on their wall. So what happens is that they earn the right to save an animal every month by being clean and sober. So now every time they walk by those pictures, they're getting their internal audience is saying, look what I'm doing. And it sees a space there for the next month's animal that they're going to save. Okay? And they don't want to give up the opportunity to get the chance to earn to do something magnificent. And so this is now an additional angle at pushing more recognition from the internal audience to the achievement of abstinence. So you see how we're trying to do that? Not everybody could afford something like that, because that's a little chunk of money every month. It's not trivial. But it might be something like go down to the soup kitchen for 2 hours. Do something like that. Hand out toys to kids, whatever it is. In other words, we visit some little kids in the hospital. In other words, a couple hours a month, we earn the right to do that. From the internal audience's standards, we go do this, and you take a picture of that event, and you frame it, and you put it on your wall. There, this is what I did. So that's something that I would add. People differ in how people's personalities influence all these mechanisms of their mind just naturally. So you have people whose internal audiences are pretty critical. They're not nasty, but they're exacting, and they demand a very high level of performance in order to get a self-esteem signal. So we have to earn it. There's just no way around it. And a lot of people that are high conscientious have that. Some people, it's easier. In fact, I have one of my very favorite clients is very easy on herself. She's one of these people that is naturally happy, and it all goes really well. And so one day, she texted me, and she said, I am disgusted with myself. I've gained back my 25 pounds. I'm doing everything wrong again. I just need something quick from Dr. Doug to just make me feel better. And I said, okay, here's something, and this is also something that is useful for any addiction. The best method to turn your feelings of self-esteem around immediately is intense exercise. The reason why that's true is that you can't give it back. If you say that I'm not going to eat any crap today, or I'm not going to have a drink today, you could give that back at midnight. So the self-esteem mechanism doesn't trust you. But if you go to the gym and you push as hard as you can, as long as it's safe, okay, push as hard as you can and exhaust yourself for 60 or 90 minutes, you can't give that back. Your self-esteem mechanism knows you did it, and it therefore rises and respects the fact that you put that effort in. You can't do a half-baked effort, or it won't give it to you. But if you want to turn the self-esteem mechanism around today, this hour, this afternoon, that's how you do it. It's the fastest method. So that's why I texted her. And she said, oh, that's really good. That would work. In fact, I feel better already. I don't even have to do it. So that's the So each person is different, and their journey is different. So we have all the pleasure trap problems. We have to work very hard on the environment. We work harder on the environment than we do on the person's internal self. But when it comes to the internal self, what we're focused on is some way to get them to listen very carefully to the internal audience. I want people addicted to self-esteem. It's not easy to get addicted to self-esteem because self-esteem is very quiet. By its very nature, it's a quiet internal signal. It's not nearly as loud as esteem. Esteem is where the rubber hits the road in human biology. That's where people are actually going to be our friend, where they're going to feed us if we've got a broken leg, whether they're going to marry us, okay? That's real esteem. Self-esteem is just the mechanism to help us get there by doing a good job. So it's quieter, okay? But when it ever comes to any journey, particularly a quiet internal personal journey like addiction, we must get very good at listening to those internal signals, and we have to prize them, and we have to watch and see that they are highly predictable and unbelievably just. So if you do the right things, they will give you a good signal. If you do the wrong things, they will punish you. And we have to love that feeling of having done the right thing and try to string that together in a way that helps us keep out of the trap. Okay? All right, very good question. All right. Yes.
Hello.
Okay.
Because of the conservation of energy principle that you wrote about in the pleasure trap, I'm going to let the lady sitting next to me ask the next question.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Kristen Bummer from Pittsburgh.
Hi there.
Nice to see you. I wanted to ask something that I struggle with all the time has to do with helping other people who may not want help.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's, say family members that are really struggling with illness and they dabble with eating better, but it never really sticks. But I think almost more relevant is when you have somebody that's actually in a program like UWL and is trying really hard and then they relapse, have a slip or have, some problems and disappear, and they're not responsive to communication and things like that. They've done enough that they want the help, they like the program, but it's not working at that moment, or they're lost, and what do you do when they kind of disappear?
And Dr. Lisle, excuse me, would you mind standing on the other side just because Gustavo can't capture you as well?
I sure will. I was thinking about the board, but that's no.
Kristen, it's interesting because we actually asked for some questions on the board, and a lot of people had questions very similar to Kristen's because it's one thing when somebody slips and has a cookie, but when they slip and gain 100 pounds back, we wish we could help them because we try reaching out and they're not responsive.
Remember that this journey is actually one that you do by yourself. All we can do is we can put out stepping stones to make this more possible for people to do it. But I don't think that I don't think I create a lot of stress for people around these issues. I think Alan does. I think he does. The reason is that I don't expect people to do well. I expect this to be a mess. It should be. Survival instinct number one is to eat the richest food in the environment. Yet all of biology is integrated into the principle of energy conservation. It's literally what the problem of biology is the transformation of energy into DNA. And that's what it is. So what animals are doing, a plant doesn't make choices. A plant just has an automatic system, and it gathers energy from the sun, and it transforms that energy into DNA. But there aren't choices being made. Animals have neurons, and neurons are part of a computational web to try to figure out what's the next best move that I can make in order to statistically increase the likelihood of my genes being on the planet 100 years or 1,000 years from now. That's actually what animal brains are up to. And so in order to do that, what animals have to do is to move. So animals can't just sit. They have to actually they're constantly in motion. And what's causing those motions is the contraction of muscles. And what's causing those specific muscles to be contracted are neurons. And the reason why those neurons are firing and having that individual contract those muscles and make those movements is a computational system that is housed in total in the brain. The brain's job is to figure out what moves can we make that will statistically increase the likelihood of biological success. That's its job. Okay? It could be a human being has an infinite number of movements that it could make. It's bounded, so you can't jump off 1 foot and go to the moon. But it's bounded but infinite. Literally, I could do this for the next 7 hours, and then I could turn around and do that. So there's an infinite number of patterns that you could do, but you won't. You'll see behavior across animal species is highly stereotyped. They do the same things over and over and over again because those types of things are the things that led to statistical increases in gene survival. So if you take a kitten and you take a string and you wiggle it in front of them, they chase it. They can't help themselves. Their brain will say, that's worth chasing, and it will contract the muscles and explode after that thing. And it won't just do it leisurely. It'll stalk, it'll move down lower to the ground. The reason why they do that is that, as the big cats will do in Africa, if they're stalking you, they don't want you to see them. So they actually do this so that they're taking up less of the visual field. That's why they do that. Okay, so yeah, if you ever go face to face with a tiger, you won't even see the whole tiger. You'll just see the face, and it will hardly have gotten your attention, and then there it is. That's how the cats are doing it too when they're chasing what are they really chasing? A rodent. That's what the string is. It's the tail of a rodent. And so what the cat is doing is it's contracting its muscles in a specific pattern in order to get food. That's why it's doing what it's doing. Now, so none of it's random. It's been shaped by evolution to be unbelievably efficient, to do it exactly the right way. So this is, it seems like a far-afield discussion, but the reason why we're having this problem is because the reason why people are having these problems is because you weren't designed for the environment that you're in. You were designed for an environment of scarcity. So almost all human beings through almost all time didn't have enough to eat. They were constantly on the edge. That's the nature of human nature. No more. So now you've completely transformed the environment in really the last 100 years into an environment of abundance. It wasn't even an environment of abundance in 1933 when my mom was born. So my mom grew up in a little ghost town with about 30 or 40 people in it on a good day in northern Idaho. It was an abandoned gold mining town. Still had a little bit of gold in there, so I still had a few miners that would work. And her father cut hair, so that's what he did. And so when they set in for winter, they lived in a shack about the size of half of this stage. That's where my mom grew up. I actually saw it about 5 years ago. I went up to see it. It's still there. The obviously pit toilet, for goodness sakes. You know, I mean outside. That's where it was. And on the front porch, there was still a pit dug in the front porch, and that's where they stored their food for the winter. So my mom says they stored sauerkraut and onions and potatoes, carrots, things like that. That's what they ate during the winter. Okay? One generation. What's the biggest problem that I face? Dietary excess. What's the biggest problem she faced? Dietary deficiency. So I'm never surprised, ever, when someone struggles. I consider it a really stellar success when anybody succeeds. I know that it can be done because I've had hundreds of people tell me that they've succeeded, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, I dropped 60 pounds in the last year. And what they don't know is that I'm not thinking, wow, you look great, et cetera. I'll say that, but what I'm really thinking is, that's incredible. What incredible self-discipline to have pulled that off, because I know what that takes. Okay, that's extraordinary. And so to me, it's extraordinary when people succeed. Can they? Yes, they can. Are things like this, Chef AJ's reign of terror? Is this a good thing? Yeah, it's a really good thing. Okay, it's fantastic. Am I surprised when people are left behind, when they're not ready and they may never be ready, that they get embarrassed and then they slink away? No, I'm not surprised. What can we do about it? I think that what we can do is what I will do with my people that struggle with alcohol or any other drugs is I predict that they're going to struggle. I tell them that I expect that they will. I tell them that we're going to have some good days and we're going to have some good weeks, but we're also going to have some relapses. We're going to have trouble. And sometimes when people feel like they're really ready to deal with drug or alcohol problems, and they think, I've got to do something about this, and they come in and they're like, okay, they understand that they have to be abstinent, and this is the day that we're going to start this thing. And I'm like, today's the day that we start to learn the process. I've never had somebody come in 35 years of clinical work in this field. I've never had a single person come in ready to turn their life around, and they turn it around that day and they never look back. It's never happened one time. In every case, there are relapses. Okay? And so my job is to essentially anticipate that that's going to happen and to not catastrophize over it, and to explain that when we struggle, it's part of the learning process. It's like learning how to walk. We're going to fall. It's like learning how to talk. We're gonna mumble. And when it comes to this, we're going to have all kinds of slips and all kinds of falls where we're going to bump our knees. It's okay. And our job is to just say, hey, no problem. We're trying to learn as we go, and on we go with the next day. That's the idea. So that's all we can do. But unfortunately, sometimes the person picks up from their environment that the expectations for them are higher than that. Maybe people are excited, and they are also excited, and they've seen other people that have been successful, and they feel like they should be able to be successful, and then they struggle, and they're not ready for that, and they're embarrassed about it. And that's too bad. All we can do is explain, learning process, plenty of mistakes. It's like learning how to walk, you're going to fall. That's all we can do. And but I am never surprised when someone would fail at this. I'm surprised when they succeed. I'm delighted, and I think it's fantastic. We at True North didn't have the time, the energy, the interest. I mean, we just had so much going in the last 30 years that we didn't have time to do a follow-up program. We were just too busy doing what we were doing. And so now that AJ is here, it's like this is what we tell people to do, and it's additional help. Okay, but again, we're trying, all of us, to try to help people move their efforts directly in the teeth of natural history. So you're going 180 degrees into the stiffest wind that there is. So it's no surprise if you've ever struggled. It's no surprise if you're struggling now. Don't worry about it. Okay, we've got the right place on the compass. We know where it is that we need to go. We expect that it's going to be difficult, and listen for the cues of the internal audience when it gives you a thumbs up when you do a good day. Okay, all right.
I looked up Reign of Terror. It says that it is a period of remorselessness, repression, and bloodshed. So that does sound a lot like UWL, doesn't it? All right. So, anybody else want to take a stab at a question? Wow. Oh, over here. Oh, God, all right. Where are you? Oh, the lady with the broken arm. Yes, we the handicapped people, yes, you will get preference with the questions. Oh, sorry, not handicapped. I'm just kidding, but we do have a lady in a wheelchair, so. Okay, would you like to say who you're from, where you are? I mean, where you wait. I mean, you know what I mean, right? You didn't think that was funny, sir. Your arms are crossed. Oh, you're cold? What about me? I got no clothes on. All right.
Julianne Kravitz from Lexington, Kentucky. We know, of course, that the effects of drug and alcohol have an effect on our behavior. But can you address what, if any, effect that our food choices have on our behavior, such as aggression or calmness or, those types of things?
Very good question. I don't think a lot is known about this. We certainly know that it's helpful to have a healthy diet that will contribute to people being less depressed. We're not sure why. We can speculate. I mean, there's good evidence for it. So I'm not sure all the reasons why, but it's there. So it's helpful in terms of depression. I don't know that it's going to be that helpful for anxiety. I don't think that that aggression is going to be involved at all. Possibly if you're more depressed or you're more uncomfortable, actually, if you're in more pain, which a lot of people are, and their diet will cause them to be in a bit more pain from inflammation, they may be more irritable. So there could be an indirect pathway that way. The thing that something that's been underestimated, so I'm going to wander off topic here. When it comes to psychological events and people's well-being and that sort of thing, probably the biggest thing that we're missing and that we're not paying enough attention to is sleep. So I had somebody ask me a little while ago about alcohol and the effects of alcohol. So we could talk about the effects of alcohol and damaging neurons and all that sort of jazz, but that's not really where the action is. The action is in alcohol, caffeine, Adderall, all kinds of stuff that people use. It disrupts sleep. And my friend Rip Esselstyn has had a saying that I've respected for a long time. He's a huge exercise guy, in case anybody doesn't know. Rip was just a phenomenal athlete. And Rip is fond of saying that diet is the king and exercise is the queen. And that always made sense to me. But now I think differently. So I still think exercise is a very nice thing. It's useful. But diet is the king, but sleep is the queen. Sleep is huge. It's a way bigger thing than I knew. So I just, this spring, I read a book by Matthew Walker. He's the head of the sleep lab at UC Berkeley. And his book is outstanding. I think it's called Why We Sleep. I hadn't read any sleep literature in 20 years. The last book that I read on sleep was by William Dement, who was one of the co-discoverers of the REM cycle, who is the head of famed sleep lab at Stanford. And at that time, I read that book and some other books as well, but that was a magna opus of that man's career. And so I learned a great deal about sleep, and that resulted in the chapter on the pleasure trap, that we knew that it was important. Now it's 20 years later. It's like the Hubble telescope. Now we're seeing much further. And so what's known, I didn't understand just how much had been learned in the last 20 years, and it's an even bigger deal than I thought. So, in fact, I thought I was going to come up here and just cite some stats for you, act like I was really smart, but I brought a cheat sheet. So, because I'm just getting this under my fingers. There's more to learn. So, let's see now. If there's a difference in your sleep from about 2 hours a night difference from 6-hour night sleeper to an 8-hour night sleeper. It might have been 5 to 7. There's a difference in at least 2 to 1 on heart attacks and strokes. Big deal. Okay. For sports injuries, the difference between teenagers sleeping 6 hours a night or 9 hours a night is a 400% difference in likelihood to be injured doing the same sports. If we're to look at cancer, your odds of contracting cancer if you're a 6-hour night sleeper versus an 8-hour night sleeper is 40% higher. Okay. When it comes to eating junk food, if you're short of sleep, you are likely to eat about 330 more calories, and you're going to be driving that towards junk food. It's interesting. Let's see what else was interesting. Oh yeah, it turns out one night of 4 hours of sleep will result in 70% of your killer cells in your immune system that go after cancer cells. 70% of them will disappear. One night. Okay, so obviously they'll be replenished the next day, for the next day. But if you had cancer, that day the cancer won. It advanced considerably. Okay, there's more. So there's oh yes, if they infect you with a cold virus in the laboratory, and you sleep 5 hours, your odds of getting the cold are 50%. If you sleep 7 hours, your odds are 18%. Sperm counts go down 29% overnight if you're a couple hours short of sleep. Look at this. This is very much equivalent to the effect sizes that we see with diet. It's not that far behind. This is a big deal. 40% cancer risk differences, 100% differences in cardiovascular disease, major impact on short-term immune function, injuries, etc. Not to mention accidents, for goodness sakes. Much higher rates of accidents when people are short of sleep. So essentially across the board, oh yeah, I learned some other things. It turns out that I, as many of us have had many nights where we are short of sleep. Just get busy, something's interesting, you got some time pressure on something, etc. And I knew that you had to take the time to the next day to try to catch it up. It turns out that you will never catch it all up. In other words, you'll catch up a chunk of it, and your nervous system is capable of doing that. But to some extent, you will never replenish that, and the effect of that is some brain damage. This now looks like a major cause of Alzheimer's. So my dietary friends have been thinking that this was cardiovascular all the way, or this was this major issue was the problems that they see were ultimately cardiovascular. Doesn't look that way. Probably cardiovascular issues have an influence. I'm sure that they do, but sleep deprivation is a big influence. What sleep is doing, which they learned in 2006, and I heard about this, but I didn't really look into it. It was just sort of an interesting discovery, is that what happens is that in non-REM sleep, which happens mostly early in the night, what happens is that there's a major cleaning job, that the system actually dumps all kinds of debris out of the cells. There's major morphological changes that take place in the brain, it's kind of like a bunch of canals open so that all this debris can get out. What happens then later on in the night is when you start dreaming and you're in REM sleep, what happens then is that process is integrating new memories. And so that's where you learn. Everything that you learned the next day, what will happen is that that's when you're actually really integrating new information into a massive, your whole data banks of how your whole memory system works. If you just learn that there's some new stock that your friend says is a good thing, you have to integrate that into everything that you think about your whole investment portfolio and your retirement and everything else. It's actually, you don't just stick a little fact in there. It's got to integrate in relation to everything else in the brain. So it's a really complicated phenomenon, everything that you learn. And this looks like a problem with things like Alzheimer's, that these folks a lot of times are real short of sleep, and their systems have been damaged enough that they can't integrate new information very well at all. So that's why they wake up the next morning and they can't remember what they did the day before. So I have, my mother is actually suffering from Alzheimer's. So this is a process I've been watching now for the last 6 or 7 years. And since I read this book, I instantly got way more ruthless about seeing to it that she got more sleep, darkening her windows, getting the lights shut off. She loves romance novels, figure. So she loves to stay up in the middle of the night reading romance novels, and I finally had to put a stop to it. And since I have, she's better. Okay, she's not a lot better, but we've definitely seen a flattening out of the decline. So this is a pretty important thing for us folks. We need to include this at very high importance for our hygiene for life. Okay? All right.
I love that we're high tech here because people are now texting me their questions. And I see a hand. I'll come over to you. I believe that's Robin. This young lady texted me a question, but I wanted her to ask it. Please say who you are and where you're from.
Hi there, I'm Sharon McRae from Maryland.
Hi there.
Happy to be here. And first of all, thank you for the talk that you just did. It's extremely relevant in our lives, and I've been trying to preach that same thing, but people never listen to their spouses, right? So my question is, working as a health coach, one thing that I encounter a lot with my clients is that they are what we call people pleasers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you can give a few tips to everyone here for the best ways to overcome people pleasing and, as you said, always do the right thing even if it's not popular.
What she's really saying, Dr. Lisle, is how can we all be a bitch like her?
I hope to not forget your question. That long diatribe on sleep. The reason I was hooking that up with the alcohol issue. Alcohol and caffeine both are major disruptives for sleep. So that's why that, I mean, obviously indulge as you will. It's your life, and I don't consider any of those things to be a sin. I consider them to be your own personal choice. But understand that we now know that those chemicals both are very disruptive to sleep, and so the person will be short of sleep the next day, and they will have done brain damage. Very slight. This is kind of like somebody opening their car door into your new car, and there's a little scratch. It's like, okay? And then somebody else opens it up, and then somebody opens it up, and somebody else opens it up, and after you've had your beautiful car for a year, it's still a nice new car, but there's a lot of scratches in it. That's what's going on with your brain. You're parking your car too close to other people, and you're scratching it up whenever we're using caffeine, alcohol, or we're short of sleep. Okay? All right, so now we'll go back to this question. People pleasing, what is that? Okay, what that is that's agreeable. So those are, when we look at the personality, the big 5 personality characteristics, agreeableness is one of the major individual differences in people. And so agreeable people are what? Agreeable, which means they don't like controversy, they don't like to contradict people, they don't like to say no, and they don't like to have other people be unhappy or distressed. So that means that they're going to get run over in negotiations. And this is going to be a problem when you live in a household where other people are not going to be on board with respect to you making some changes. So whether those changes are, if I have 2 spouses, both of which are smoking cigarettes, and the agreeable person decides that they really should change, and the disagreeable person is not going to change, the odds of this happening are very low. Okay, because the disagreeable person is going to keep that thing right in that person's face, and they're not going to allow the changes. Okay, food also it's not quite as nasty as that, but it's a similar process. So I would say that when we can't do some magic assertiveness training, which is what was big in the 1970s. A famous book called Your Perfect Right was written by Alberti and Emmons, and it was sort of came out of behavioral type therapy, I believe. And the notion is that you could change and you could stand up for yourself and talk back to people, and you could learn how to do this. It turns out that's not really true. The reason is that personality is deep and intractable, and people just are who they are. So agreeable people are who they are. So we can't get them to stand up, talk back, say no. That's not going to happen. So we're going to have to devise other ways around the problem. And the other ways around the problem are to be slicker in the negotiations with the people that they're dealing with. So this is why we say things like the following. We say things like, I'd just like to run an experiment. So I'm just going to run an experiment. It's just going to be for 6 weeks. I'm going to just try it out and see what happens. Oh, it'll never work. You'll never stick with it. You're probably right. It's no good. You're going to die of protein deficiency. You're probably right. Okay? So essentially what we try to do is we try to carve out a little space, because everyone understands that fundamentally we have the right to be wrong. You've got a right to make wrong decisions and pay the price for them. You have a right to do so. The agreeable person can't keep the other people from keeping junk out of the house. That's not going to happen. So if you're an agreeable person that lives with other people who are antagonistic to this goal, you will not be able to negotiate that. And you might think, well, that's not fair and that's not right. Come on, let's, do some psycho judo on them and hypnotize them in their sleep, and, so we can change things. No, we can't. So there's things that we can do and there's things that we can't do. The good news about any of these changes, there's sort of good news and bad news. Bad news is that it challenges us at the root of our biology. We want to go for the richer, most convenient food. If we have any social pressure at all, it's almost certainly going to be social pressure trying to push us into the trap rather than help us out of it, and etc. So that's the bad news. The good news is no matter how antagonistic they are, they're not actually going to take a chunk of steak and hold you by the back of the neck and put it in your mouth. That they're not going to do. They're not actually going to force you to do anything. They're just going to make it uncomfortable, and they're going to make it more difficult. So it's useful for us to realize, okay, it's uncomfortable and it's difficult, but I can still do this, and you can. And we're going to make it as comfortable as possible for having conflict in a social environment by hiding behind the notion of experiments and advertising to them that you think that you're probably not going to pull it off, and who knows how long you're going to do it, but you'd like to try it for 6 weeks and just see what happens, see how it feels, just for once. That's the idea. It's much easier to sell people on the idea of short-term change than it is on permanent long-term negotiations. If you say, I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to have it done this way for 6 weeks, they're like grumbling, thinking that you're gonna stumble after 6 days anyway, so okay, whatever, right? But if you said, I'm gonna hammer this thing out right now, I need to do this for me, I need to change my life, you gotta help me do this, this is how I want it, you can eat all the junk you want outside of the house, but inside the house it's gotta be a clean environment, blah, blah, blah. There's like no way that happens. Okay. Only way that happens is that if our person is the disagreeable person and the other person is the agreeable person. That's the only way that goes down, not the other way. Does that make sense? So experiments are the leverage, the social leverage that we have to try to carve out a period to do exactly that. That if we run our experiment and then we see how much better we feel, that can be the incentive to say, you know what, I'm going to try it another month seems to be working okay. And behind that, we try to build the momentum and develop what I call a deep groove, and to the point where we're not going to let it go. Okay? All right.
Okay, I did say that anybody that had a obvious disability could have a question. You had a horrible accident. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I just went through major surgery, and I was wondering, nobody's been able to answer this question. Is it okay to do a 3 to 5 day water fast to speed up the recovery process?
I'm not sure what your surgery is and what we're trying to recover. I'm not sure you want to share it. Or
I broke my heel.
Oh, yes.
Level 4 major fusion of the heel.
Got it. Okay.
Major pain, cadaver bone inside my heel, the whole 9.
Right.
Well, you got a dead person in you? That's some kinky shit. Yeah. Cool.
Water fasting can be a very useful thing for a variety of issues. This is not one of them that I would be trying to get any leverage behind. I think fasting is the single most overlooked tool in modern medicine, and I think for a wide variety of problems, there's nothing like it. So we're going to have actually a couple people here this weekend that are very knowledgeable in fasting. Certainly Dr. Alan Goldhammer is probably the most knowledgeable person in the world in clinical fasting in humans. So he'll be here, and you can, True North is a place that people can go and get assistance in doing a water fast. If you can get in, which you can't, it's like 5 months wait to get into True North. But also a young doctor that was a staff doctor at True North for several years, Dr. Nathan Gershfeld, will be here. He's also the young doc that interviews me on the Beat Your Jeans podcast. So he's a friend of mine, and he has his own place, has his own small fasting place in Southern California. And so he's now open and doing this as well. So when you see him around, and you will, you could ask him questions if you have any questions about fasting. Fasting is, we'll ask Alan questions also at Q&A. Nothing like it. I sit here now 35 years after I first learned, actually a little bit more, about 37 years ago is when I first learned about fasting. And when Alan started to do this under the direction of a doctor in Australia. And it just worked. And we had tapes that we would send back and forth. You know, Dr. Alan Goldhammer and I have been best friends since we were 8. And so by the time we were 21, we'd already lived most of our lives together. And so we weren't going to give up talking just because he was in Australia. So we would send cassette tapes, and and he still has them. In case anybody, he keeps everything. So, but I can remember I'd get in these tapes, and he'd say, okay, well, we got a person that's now fasting for problem X, whatever problem X was, and he'd say, this one looks bad, but if this one gets well, I'll really believe it. And he'd go over and over for the next year and a half. This is what I would hear. I can remember one of them was a lupus case. The person was in really bad shape. Alan fasted him. Old Dr. Burton had a way of assessing things. Whenever people would come in, they'd say, well, how long do I need to fast? He'd say, 6 weeks. Everybody was 6 weeks. And so I'm sure the lupus patient was fasted for 6 weeks. And what the body can do on a supervised water fast at 6 weeks is stunning. And so we learned over that year that the folklore that Helen had heard about was true. And so we've gone on to demonstrate that with a wide variety of conditions, but we're not going to find any magic in a few days. So you just eat healthy and call it good, okay? I wouldn't do it. No need to. You might, if you wanted to fast for other reasons, clear your palate, get a little healthier, have a little high blood pressure, then that might make sense to do a very short fast on your own. But if you go longer than 3 days, I would always recommend that you go where people are knowledgeable about how to supervise a fast. I think that's a smart move. But for yourself, what you're trying to do, fasting isn't that magic. Fasting is a very slow and magnificent detox. So it's not going to be building bones faster. It would be detoxing your liver, your kidneys, your cells, etc. In other words, it's a general, huge, magnificent house cleaning that then winds up reversing disease processes right before your eyes, because those disease processes are a body that's been overwhelmed by some toxic pressure. And the fasting then removes that, and then the body gets on top of it. But bones are bones, and just eat healthy food. Okay.
Dr.
All
Lisle,
right.
have you ever fasted?
Yes, I have. Not often. It's not a lot of fun. It's very, very effective, but it's not a lot of fun.
Yes, it was Robin. I thought I saw somebody over there. I will try to get to as many people as I can. However, www.esteemdynamics.com, you can make an appointment. And Dr. Nate Gershfeld will be here this weekend. He's working today, and he'll have brochures for everyone if you want to find out more about his center.
Thank you for taking my question. I hope it's a good one. I have a question about cramming healthy foods and overeating even healthy foods, and how the full belly becomes the actual signal for something sweet or eating off plan. You spoke about this fairly recently.
Yes.
And how to the extinction of that behavior. So can you get into that? Is that a good question?
Let's see. I'm just looking over at that chart, whether I want to go over there and use it. I don't think I will. This is I call this the condition cram, and it's a lecture that I gave here last year, and it's also, Gustavo and I did a webinar that's posted on the McDougall website on September 2017. So this is the story. There's a lot of components to this story, but the notion is that when you do something that disrupts the homeostatic mechanisms, the body will push back. So, for example, if you smoke cigarettes, the body's going to push back. So it's going to learn that it's about to get a cigarette every hour. And what it will do is it will actually engineer a neurochemical defense to neutralize the effects of the nicotine. So let's suppose that you've been doing this for a while, and the nervous system is expecting that you're going to get nicotine, and then you don't get the nicotine because you're out of cigarettes. What you feel is a craving, and that's what we call it. It's actually an uncomfortable, agitated state. But the reason why you're having the uncomfortable, agitated state is the neurochemical defense that is actually designed chemically by your own nervous system, by your own DNA, to counteract the anticipated toxicity of the nicotine. It's actually that ingenious that your body is capable of doing this, which is just staggering, but it is. That defense has now been activated, but now there's no nicotine. And so when there's no nicotine, but the defense is there, what you feel is craving, because it's uncomfortable. Now, if you get your hands on a cigarette and smoke it, then the nicotine and the defense reaction meet in the middle, they neutralize each other, and you feel relief. Okay, that's how it works. So the same would be true of heroin. So you use heroin, it knocks you out of equilibrium. You actually engineer a neurochemical defense against the heroin. Okay? So now you've got a defense. Incidentally, this is how tolerance develops. So now it turns out you can't get the same high. So now you use more heroin, but now the defense gets bigger. You use more, now the defense gets bigger. Okay? So this is how this works. Same thing with any drug. And if you're rattling around in the back room and you think that your Stone Age brain has made all these associations and expects that you're going to get heroin, it will light up a tremendous defense against it because it's an extremely disruptive chemical. And if you don't use, the craving will be unbelievably acute. Okay? It'll be a phenomenal misery. That's what that will be. So think about cigarette withdrawal times 30. That's what that is. So the nervous system is smart enough to actually pick up cues that indicate that you are going to have this thing happen. So it could be essentially on a timing clock that people tend to use a cigarette about once every hour or so, or maybe some people every half hour. And so as a result, the little system is like, it's about time. And so it kind of knows it's about time, so it engineers the defense. And then if you don't get the smokes, you feel the craving. And then when you get the smokes, you've now reinforced this whole thing. You feel the relief, and then the whole clock starts over again. Okay. Now, so notice that it could be on a timing clock, or it could be, for example, the sounds of something. So Ivan Pavlov had dogs conditioned to the sound of a bell. So he rang the bell, and because that was reliably associated with food, they started salivating, even though there's no food around. So it could be a sound, it could be the time of day, it could also be something else. So it could be location. So for example, let's suppose you worked in a cooler. First day you got there, you'd be really cold, okay? But the second day you got there, you'd start to warm up a little bit before you go in the cooler. And by the time you'd worked there 2 or 3 weeks, your hands would start to get warm in the parking lot before you ever got in the building. Okay, because your brain was picking up cues that you're in that environment. So it's not conscious, it would just happens automatically. You could go to work that day and they could tell you, oh, the cooler's all shut down. Doesn't matter. Your hands are still going to get hot. You can't consciously stop it. These are unconscious programs that get laid down. Now, so it's going to turn out that if you eat healthy food all day long, things are going great. And then at night, what you ought to do, if you're a good animal, is you ought to nose around the kitchen and the pantry and cram in the richest food in the environment. Because remember, that's survival instinct number one. More of your ancestors died of starvation than in any other cause. So therefore, it would be really smart for you to just chow down another 500 or 1,000 calories of whatever the richest food is around. All I have is whole natural food. Then the cashews are going down tonight. Okay. It's not the romaine lettuce and the carrots. Okay? It will be the richest food in the environment that's going to activate the cravings. And what's going to happen is that when a person would do this repeatedly, then they're doing this after they've already reached satiety from dinner. Then the system is going to anticipate this. Now, it could do it on a timing clock, and it probably does, but it probably also gets conditioned to a full stomach itself. So literally, a full stomach at dinner can signal to the nervous system that we are about to cram in another 700 calories worth of something. So as a result of that, if we activate, if the stomach, full stomach itself activates the anticipation that this is going to happen, which activates a whole bunch of digestive processes that are what? Craving. Okay? So then what happens? When we then eat that stuff, they meet in the middle, it's relieved, and we've reinforced the cycle. So this is what I call the conditioned cram. It's been a puzzle to a lot of us for a long time, like what was going on. So Alan would always joke with people. He'd say, oh, so you're still hungry after? Yeah, I just feel like I want to have a little something. Really? Have some more salad. Nah, that isn't what I want. Some steamed vegetables in there. Nah, that isn't it either. Actually, there's some baked potatoes in there. Nah, this doesn't quite do it. Say, oh, it's a specific hunger. Yeah, that's what it was. And Joel Furman has talked for years about trying to tell people where the real hunger is. It's in the throat, or it's in your back of your mouth, or I don't know where. He's trying to think through the same thing that Alan was thinking through, which is that we've known that this hunger is not hunger, it's something else, but what on earth do you call it? And so I finally found the answer. The answer popped up out of scientific literature in 2017. It turns out it's classical conditioning. So very cool, very interesting, and fascinating. So how do you fix a classical conditioning problem? Same way you fix every classical conditioning problem. Alcoholism is a classical conditioning problem. Cigarettes are a classical conditioning problem. Junk food's a classical conditioning problem. And cramming healthy food at the end of your day is a classical conditioning problem. So what do? We grit our teeth, you have a nice full meal, and you leave the kitchen and you don't come back. Don't do it. Don't come back. Oh, but I just really feel like I want to nibble on something. How about an apple? No, nothing. Okay? The reason is we have to get through the extinction burst. We have to get through several days where this thing gets frustrated before you start having the craving. So if you go a week, probably no more than 10 days, and don't eat anything significant after dinner, nothing, call it good, then 10 days from now, you won't be having the cravings. They'll be gone. You will have counter-conditioned this process. It can spontaneously recover very easily. Just have to sniff something tasty and just feel like, oh, why not? Like, it's pretty healthy. Why can't I just have a bite? Well, you just go right ahead, no problem. It's not a crime, but it's very likely that you will reactivate that conditioned cram, and then we'll be fighting some cravings the next few nights. So that's how that works. Incidentally, see how we're doing. This actually solved a mystery that Alan and I had for 20 years. We would have people come to us, and they would say, they'd leave True North, or they left the McDougall program, and they'd said, we did great, or I did great for 7 months. And then on Thanksgiving, it just all went in the toilet. And I've been a mess, ever since then for the last year. And we would hear that story, and we would say, oh, yeah, geez, so hard, Jeff. And we'd get behind closed doors and say, that's ridiculous. These people are telling us stories. There's no way that is the way that worked. And the reason why we were so convinced that there was no way that's the reason that it could work that way is that taste neuroadaptation would never do that to you. So you can, if you're eating healthy food and you're on a roll and then you eat some rich food, your taste buds don't change in a meal. They don't change there's no way. The taste neuroadaptation processes are long, slow processes that take weeks. So you're not going to adulterate your taste buds with one chunk of pumpkin pie. There's no way is that happening. So we were like, whatever, just telling us a story. The truth is that the person just got off track and wandered into the weeds and then got back in the pleasure trap and then they're sunk. That's what we said. We were wrong. The stories were true, and they were true behind the conditioned cram. Conditioned cram is different than taste neuroadaptation. Taste neuroadaptation is something that's going to change very slowly, but classical conditioning processes are very fast in terms of relapse. They're like, boom, one trial, and you're going to relapse. Here's why this would work this way. Suppose that you are a little bird that lives in a land where there's some of these worms by a river, and you figure out that these little worms are by the river every day at about 4 o'clock. So you keep wandering over there at different times, but they're always there at 4 o'clock. So every day at about 4 o'clock, you just have a craving. You're just a bird. You're not taking notes. This is all unconscious classical conditioning programming. So at about 4 o'clock, you get a craving for worms, and you fly over to where the worms are. And so one day, there's no worms there. There have been worms there for 4 months. No worms. So you're frustrated, and you're craving the worms, and you scratch around a while, and then after 20 minutes, you leave because you can't, there's obviously no worms. Now, the next day, you would not say to yourself, well, yesterday there's no worms, I'm not going to go over there. That would be a stupid way to build the nervous system. The worms have been there 120 days out of the last 121 days. the statistical likelihood is that they're going to be back. So the animal's going to go back. It's still going to have the craving. It's going to go back, and there's no worms there the next day, and now it's going to scratch a little harder. It's like those worms, they must be here. They must be close. I just have to work harder to get the reward. Okay? That's the extinction burst. So now the animal's frustrated. The cravings are more intense than they were even after the first frustration. The third day, it's even worse. Now he's digging his beak down into the muck. It's like, where are those worms? People are thinking, yes, that's what happens with me in my pantry. Where was that stuff that was hidden from the kids? Okay. And so you're working harder. Eventually, 5-6 days in, the animal starts to rerun the cost-benefit analysis on whether it's worth going over to where those worms were. And its brain starts saying, well, no worms 5 days in a row. There's a good chance there's not going to be any worms. Maybe today we'll just skip it. You see? Now you're starting to get into extinction. And so let's suppose that bird goes into extinction for the next 2 months. So every 4th day now it goes by and checks. And then it gets out to a week. Okay? And then it goes 2 weeks in a row. Doesn't even go there. But then it's still once in a while will say, I think I ought to go over and check on those worms. So it goes over and checks on those worms after having even been there for 2 weeks. The cravings are almost non-existent. They're very, very quiet. But there's just every once in a while, there's a little bump, which Pavlov called the spontaneous recovery. Okay? He saw this over 100 years ago. Like, didn't know why, but think about this. That's exactly how you should organize a nervous system and to make sure that you don't forget about a reward that might still be there. This is what I call calling up your ex. All right? So you go a little while, and there's a little spontaneous recovery. You fly back over there, and what's there? Worms. Well, now this guy eats his fill, right? And now do you think he's back the next day? Is he back the next day after that? You bet. In other words, just that fast on one trial, we recover a learning process circuit. That's different than neuroadaptation. That's what happens at Thanksgiving. What happens at Thanksgiving is people can get into a beautiful groove of great habits, and they wind up doing really well. And then at Thanksgiving, think about what goes on at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is the official time when you're supposed to cram. It's rude not to. And it's like, oh, for crying out loud, once a year, why wouldn't we cram once a year? We're taking this thing way too seriously if we can't cram at Thanksgiving. So what do? We cram at Thanksgiving. And what happens? Oh, worms. Okay? And then it's worse because there's leftovers. So then we cram the next day. So now, boom, boom, 2-3 days in a row, we've crammed the circuits. And now the cram circuit is all the way reactivated, basically, and now the person is completely in trouble. Okay? So that, you were all telling us the truth. We weren't believing you. We were wrong, and now we've learned this. And so that's why the cram circuit, is an important new concept for us to pay attention to, and particularly with respect to weight loss. We want to make sure that we're not cramming every night and setting up that pattern. Okay. All right. Maybe one more question, or no? I think we're.
Yeah, we have time for one
more.
Was it you? Was it over here, or am I missing somebody? If anybody has like a $20 bill, maybe that would help me come to you. So, it's like it kills me. Could you just be here like all day, like a Doug-a-thon? It's a Doug-a-thon. Now, is this a good question? I mean, is it really good? Is it about? It's about sleep. Are you going to talk about sleep anymore?
No. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Let's ask.
Okay. So you were talking about sleep. It was fascinating. A lot of us have Fitbits, and you can see now how much time you spend in REM and light sleep and deep sleep.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? How do you improve it? What's most valuable?
Yeah. Just the kind of question we'd expect out of the hyper-conscientious nutcases that come to a place like this. It's what it takes to make these important changes. Actually, it's more important, rather than worry about keeping track of things, what's really important is to be sleeping to satiety. So that's why we want to typically have the lights out reasonably early. It's interesting. These guys, they've also recently solved a puzzle that was a mystery in the back of my mind 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I learned that early birds versus night owls was genetic. And this was a great comfort to me because I'm a night owl, and my dad was an early bird, and he was always just incredibly frustrated at me. and that I was essentially lazy and would never amount to anything because I did get out of bed. And so then when I learned that it was genetic, it's like, hey, it's genetic, sorry. My sister got the early bird gene, interestingly enough, and my mom is a night owl, so I got her gene. She's actually a pleasant, intelligent, nice person. My dad's ornery, difficult, etc. So it turns out that in our culture, the early birds are rewarded. In other words, they're seen as the people that are with it and conscientious and capable, etc. And us night owls are seen as the flakes. And actually, we actually have more sleep problems than the early birds because the night owl gene can cause us to be more attracted to keeping the lights on longer, and then we don't sleep to satiety as often as the early birds, and we wind up getting chopped off by the alarm clock. So that's a problem. I knew something was up, though, with this. One of my early clients was a total flake. Just, he's probably gone now because it was a long time ago, but the guy was a total flake. But he was an early bird. And so he was always like, wanting to see me early in the morning. I'm not going to do this. That's the whole reason I became a psychologist, is I didn't want to work before 10 o'clock. And, he wanted to see me at 7 in the morning, for goodness sakes. I'm like, I'm not going to do anything of the kind. And so there was this sort of latent criticism coming from him about this, and I thought, it isn't so great to be some early bird. Look at this guy. So anyway, I now learned why there are early birds and night owls. It's fantastic. It's a beautiful little piece of biological logic. Our ancestors, at one point, many million years ago, slept in trees. But at some point, they came down out of the trees. And when they came down out of the trees, they were vulnerable to predators at night. Chimpanzees to this day spend a great deal of time constructing beds up in trees so that they're not vulnerable to predators and they're not likely to fall out of the trees and then wind up injured. We sleep on the ground, and we sleep in groups on the ground, actually around fire. And so what humans did is they did two things, two major changes in human nature. Several, but here's two big ones. Number one, our close relatives, primate relatives, sleep about 12 to 14 hours a day. We sleep 8 to 9. So we've made the sleep shorter. We've crammed it in. We're super efficient at sleeping, which is all the more reason why it's a problem to chop it off, because you're already cramming this thing into as small as possible space. And the reason for that is you're vulnerable to predators. The second thing we did was learn to sleep in shifts. So the early birds, it turns out the early birds and the night owls in the population are about equally balanced. So it's going to turn out that the early birds go to bed early, they get up early, the late night owls go to bed later, get up late, and this is how human beings solved the problem of sentry duty around predators in the nighttime. Very cool. So the answer to your question, though, is to be very indulgent about your sleep. You want to sleep as much as you can. If you're a night owl, be careful because the early morning light will get you up earlier than you would otherwise get up if you had you gone to bed earlier at a reasonable hour for a night owl. So a reasonable hour for a night owl is probably 10 o'clock, okay? Or, it depends upon where you are, time of year, etc. But in other words, it's probably 3 hours after dusk, whereas the early birds can go to bed even sooner. And so in that kind of shift. But if we're staying up till midnight, it can get tricky because the morning light will start streaming in at 6:30 or 7, and it will wake up the night owls. And now we got a problem because now we're short of sleep. And we don't want that to happen. Okay? All right. I think that's
just so you know, it's 3:32. You did start a few minutes late. Should we do one more question?
One more. I have no problem.
Okay. And then may I ask you a question, Dr.
Sure.
Lau? We're obviously not going to get to everyone's question. Would it be acceptable if I asked for them to write them on an index card and maybe gave them to Nate, and maybe sometime during a future episode of Beat Your Genes, you could answer them there?
Always.
Great, because tomorrow I know you have a talk. It may take the whole hour. So this is like the most stressful thing. How about a guy? We haven't heard from a guy yet. Are you a guy, sir? Are you a single guy? Wait, say what? Okay, never mind. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, if there are single guys here, let me just say, I'm not very good at math, but the odds are in your favor. Hey, I know you guys. How you doing? You're not single? Wait, is your wife here? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I'm just teasing.
She's my number 2, so
Your second wife?
yeah, and she's
You have 2 wives.
no. So she's putting me on a diet.
Yes.
Robbie Hanna here from Michigan. You talked about the internal audience, and we've learned also how to reframe our external environment where it can be a positive reinforcement to us based on how we own ourselves and reframe our surrounding. So here what you talked about initially, what we're kind of more created for or with, and now what we have the abundance, we can reframe and say, you know what? All this Burger King crap and blah, blah, blah is really not there for us. So we reframe ourselves and say, that is not what we should do. In your experience, people who reframe into a positive feeling as compared to the internal audience, whom are more successful?
Boy, that's kind of a complicated question, and you and I might have to spin that one out for 15 or 20 minutes, So yeah, I'm just going to pass on that one. You just got a few too many moving parts for us to work our way through that. But good, very good question. Okay. If we had one more quick one with somebody right here close to you, AJ, we'll take it. Okay.
Yeah, she had her hand up. This is very, very stressful. What? The index cards were good.
Yes.
We do have index cards with us.
Just stick a fork in it, AJ. It's a carrot
Just
or
stick
asparagus.
a fork in it. Here, you got a question?
Just got to.
No? You're a guy. You got a question? All right. I can't. I feel like
There's one
Sophie's,
right there.
I
There's
feel
one
like
right
it's
there.
Sophie's choice.
There we go.
Is
Okay, this is it.
This is it. Make it good, make it short, make it pertinent to everybody.
Totally. Well, I don't know if it will then.
All right. Oh, Elk Grove? You could go to his house. You're like a block away. Then talk to him at home.
Well, that's what I was going to ask was, do you do face-to-face consultations or just like online?
The only at True North Health Center, Santa Rosa, California. That's the only place you can see me. No. That was too short. We need one legitimate question.
Here. Is that Howard? Oh, no, that's Ray. All right, I know Ray. There you go, Ray. My guy, Ray. Ray has lost 80 pounds since the last Ultimate Weight Loss Conference. He is a new man.
Awesome.
Yes, I'm very happy. You said you learned something. People that came to you and they had Thanksgiving and then they were a mess after that, and you never believed it.
Yes.
Now you believe it.
Yes.
What's the solution?
Oh, that's actually a very good question. I think the solution is to not cram on Thanksgiving. And you know what? I've done that several times myself where I just decided for some reason, like, why would I, whenever I eat lousy, I feel lousy. I don't feel terrible. I just don't feel good. And so there was some Thanksgiving probably 10, 12 years ago where I just decided, you know what? I'm not going to do this cramming thing. Well, I didn't even have that word for it. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to eat normally and have a couple of different, more exotic vegetables that I normally wouldn't have had and call it a day. And I've done that more often than not in the last 10 years. And it's fine. It's like we just don't make such a big fuss out of this thing. Make a fuss over the fact that I've got 7 vegetables to choose from instead of 4, you know. So, yeah, the solution is just treat it like a really a somewhat extra pleasant normal day and forget it. It's just not do the cram thing. Just skip it. Okay. All right. That's enough for one day. Thank you very much, folks.
Ladies and
It's a
gentlemen,
pleasure.
Dr. Doug Lisle.
Okay.
We are
Thank
going
you,
to
folks.
take about a 12-minute break. We'd like to get back as close to 3:45 as possible.